setting up your meeting for Facebook Live.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Sneha Ru. I'm a palliative physician and founder of Uri Kalankini. Uri Kalankini is an organization that's changing narratives around menstruation and sexuality in India using art, theater, and dialogue. This series is called Leaning into the Network series, where we are bringing people from different parts of our network to meet each other, to share their skills, their journeys, certain concepts they hold dear, and also specific relief efforts they're doing around COVID-19 situation. Today, we're very happy to have Jigyasa Sogarwal with us. Hi Jigyasa.
Hi, Sneha. Hi. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you for giving us your time and being ready to share your knowledge. So the topic today is power of shame, ideas of self that reside in the body.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So,
We'll ask same first question to everyone
okay.
before we get to the topic itself, which I will repeat again and ask more about it again.
Mhm.
When were you made aware of your gender? And how did the situation in your family enable that or not?
Okay. First of all, thank you so much, and I must say that your work is inspiring in so many ways. So more power to you. Before we begin this, and I think that the question on gender and when did I come to terms with it, or maybe just got aware of it. I don't think there was one particular moment really where you sort of got the Buddhahood really, but I think there was a series of things that one kind of noticed while one was growing up. And I think when I bring in the family in this equation becomes very peculiar, because I had what you called, in some ways one could call a very insular sort of a upbringing. My father, and I would say definitely him, did not really have the concept of two different genders. So most parts of when I was growing up, I don't know if there was a difference between me and my brother in terms of him being a boy and me being a girl. So if you allow me to sort of give you a very simple example, I mean, for the initial part of my life, I actually would go along. He put both me and my brother on a scooter and take us both to the barber shop, because he didn't really think that there was a distinction between how girls should get their hair cut and how boys should get their hair cut. And I felt great, really, because even the smaller me thought that this is cool, that there's something very interesting that only men do, and I get to be a part of that group. So I think in that sense, even to now, to this date, I think that kind of distinction at home with both my parents and my brother does not exist. But for me, therefore, the whole coming to terms with the fact that there is something called gender, and there is a gender expectation and a performance, became all the more difficult into the extreme when I stepped out. So school in that sense sort of made uh, being a girl very painful, so to say, disciplining, and how your hair should be, how your uniform should be, and the rest of it. So I think I sort of learned it more outside than having to learn it inside the home. And home in that sense provided that space that where everything was not about gender, but outside, like very very simple things, really. How there are religious gatherings and the two seating arrangements for men and women. So having to choose there, that you have to now the father would move with the brother in a different setting, and you'll sit with the mother and the aunt. So I think for me, it was not just one act, but several different ways of choosing, where a choice was thrown at you, that make a choice, which side are you on, really. I think that
It was
happened
not
outside.
really a choice, actually. Like,
Yeah.
if you wanted, you could go sit with the men and boys in the
Yeah,
puja.
absolutely. Because I growing up, I actually thought that was cooler, that men were cooler. Not because somehow I didn't understand most of it, really, what was happening. But I think even as a small child, I knew that there's something that what men do is considered perhaps more important than what women do. And the fact that I wasn't aware, I would still believe that the whole coming to terms with sex and the gender distinction and the debate and the rest of it only happened when I came to college. But even before that, you could feel that something is up and you don't know what's going on. Yeah,
You want to be among the boys and
yeah,
be one of
yeah.
them. Yeah.
You just felt that something important is going around there. That's what you felt, and you wanted to be in the important lot.
Right. Yeah. The conversation today, you have chosen the topic power of shame,
Yeah.
ideas of self that reside in the body.
Mm.
And you have done scholarly work around that. Can you talk about the work itself and the organization where you did, the institution
Yeah.
JNU?
Yeah, I most definitely can. So I've done my I've done my I'm right now a PhD candidate at Center for Political Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and I am right now looking at political emotions and the role emotions play in institutions. Parliament is my case study at the moment. But before I moved to this PhD topic, I worked on the politics of shame, and I looked at naked body protests for my MPhil dissertation. So this actually, the things that I'm going to talk about are part of the work that I've done for my dissertation, and also some reflections on thinking about shame and bodies generally. Um, Shame was an unlikely topic for a research work, for a dissertation at the time, and I remember very clearly, right when I was jumping in the project, one of my professors at JNU only very candidly sort of suggested it to me that, Jigyasa, all research work, or all work for that matter, should come from personal experience. If it's a question that's dear to you, if it's a question that you've always wanted an answer for, then you must go ahead and research. Because a lot of research, even when it's for a particular public cause or maybe for a particular public concern, it also is also related very centrally to something that has concerned you. And then I thought that perhaps shame is one of those topics that uh, and both shame and political emotions, because shame in fact is an emotion there, has kind of informed a lot of my thinking, has built me into something, and also remains something that wasn't explored enough in our curriculum. So while we do read feminism, while we do talk about gender, while there are gender studies, it almost entirely felt that every analysis of the political, you know, structure, or everything that we talk about, usually does not take into consideration emotions per se. So yeah, that is where the idea of shame and the fact that political emotions are a serious concern and they need to be looked at, that's where it began.
Yeah, thank you so much. And even the initial waves of feminism was not taking biology into consideration, and it was looking at menstruating bodies as less than. You didn't want to address, you didn't want to bring biology in between because there was somewhere shame associated, and you didn't
Yeah,
want to see that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we'll yeah, we'll come to this menstruating bodies and shame later. I wanted to just ask you, what is shame? Like when you study shame, if someone were to ask you to define it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Let me begin by this. Let me say from a commonsensical perspective, if it were two people, more than two people sitting together and saying, okay, what is shame? What
Hmm.
really do you think? What do you mean by shame? Well, I would say shame is an experience. I felt it. I'm sure you must have felt it, and people feel it. Sometimes they feel it very deeply. Sometimes it's felt in the moment. You just feel ashamed at the moment, but you may not so later. But then there are times that you're ashamed of something for longer durations of time, and that shame continues to be with you forever. So in the most commonsensical terms, if one were to look at shame, one would say, well, it's a negative experience. It feels terrible. Nobody aspires to be ashamed. Today I'm going to feel ashamed. You Happiness in that sense is a pursuit. You want to pursue happiness, but you don't really want to pursue shame, even though it's one of the most commonly felt emotion. So what is shame then? uh, Shame is a negative judgment of who you are. And shame is a feeling of being exposed to the world. Shame is a feeling of being available, of being visible, and visible in a way where the people are actually looking at you in a critical way. They're making judgments. They are criticizing you. They're calling you names. So shame is experienced inwardly. You feel it in yourself, but it is caused externally. And the external cause is the sheer visibility, which invites ridicule, which invites embarrassment, which invites humiliation. So, shame in that sense is a negative judgment.
Right.
If,
And,
if,
go on.
if, yeah, if one were to look at shame politically, however, because shame as an emotion is different from shame as politics, and because I'm a political science, practically quote unquote married to it for almost 10 years now, and I'm still not sure of the word marriage, but I'd take that in stride for me here. But if one were to look at shame politically, then politics has to do with anything that brings in the element of power. And therefore, shame as an emotion becomes political because it also becomes a tool for power. And that's where the narrative begins to shift and change. So that's where shame becomes problematic.
Yeah, I'll just pick it up from the answer reply you gave itself. Can we speak more into how shame and the politics of shame um, is very rampant in the way our society is, structured? If you could give us a few examples of that, and then we can go to, what is the power that is inherently present in shame?
Sure, sure. One of the simplest examples of shame I would begin with is sociological. It starts at home. Starts with punishment and reward, right? You want to ensure that there's a certain amount of behavior, certain way in which children sort of acquire sociological traits. So you punish them, and one of the ways of punishing them is calling out shame, is sort of using words and ideas that ensure that shame is felt culturally. Uh, look at the media representations of, say, for example, something that is not desirable, something that is dirty. So the idea of dirt, or the idea of calling out certain names, trying to sort of create a scenario where certain kinds of bodies and certain kinds of people, certain kind of descriptive identities tend to be more shamed than others. I mean, perhaps there couldn't be a more opportune time to pick this up, but the Black Lives Matters campaign, and the very fact that when you see an advertisement, say in the Indian context, telling you that there is a scale, once you apply this particular fair cream, you're going to improve in that scale, automatically tells a non-white skin that perhaps there's something that needs to be fixed about my skin, and therefore I need to use this. So there's a certain amount of celebration or elevation of desirable and the ideal through media, through conversations, through words, through slurs. And then everybody else is made to feel as if they need to be ashamed of what they are not, which is just another way of existing. But in reality, the elevation of some comes at the cost of, reduction of others. And these are some of the examples in which politically, culturally, and sociologically shame is used.
Yeah. Yeah, like I can think of even as when little children touch their genitals, it's like shame, shame, don't do that. The organ is called shame or puppy shame or things like that. So it is from there.
Yeah,
Or when a young boy starts playing with Barbies, it's like when you use the word sissy or don't cry like a girl,
yeah,
you are inducing shame, and it's yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. To prevent, um, to prevent any other kind of behavior, really. And there's a very interesting formulation that Mary Douglas, in her work, that there's something called social inarticulateness. So anything that cannot be articulated, anything that sort of disturbs the picture, the sanitized, clear picture of the heteronormative male and the female, the moment they see that it's coming on the surface, the first thing that's done is that you use shame to ensure that it never comes up. So shame then therefore becomes a tool in both punishing but also disciplining people into the set matrix. And that's how then the ideal picture of the society, and for that matter, politics, continues to sort of remain.
This is very interesting. You discipline someone by calling them a slut because being a slut is such a
Yeah.
ridiculous thing or a bad thing. Then you're telling that okay, good girls don't hang out with boys, or
Yes.
good girls don't wear certain clothes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
yeah.
So absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. What would you say are the identifiers of shame, and how is shame somatically experienced,
Mhm.
like in our physiology?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's actually the question that becomes relevant the moment you have to sort of then become conscious of the shame that you're feeling. The primary identifier, not exactly an identifier, but to feel shame, one has to first of all know that shame can only be experienced in the local, in the space which is particular to them. I cannot be ashamed of, or you cannot be ashamed of something that's abstract, that is at a distance from you. So, in that sense, a shame is experienced in the local, in the immediate. That's the first thing. The
Mm.
second thing is, and that is related to the first thing, is the object. The something that you're ashamed of or made to be ashamed of. There is a very concrete object. It could be within you. So it could be your body, it could be your hair, your eyes, your skin color, your genitals. It could be outside of you. But even when it is outside of you, it is something that's valuable to you. So, say for example, the vicious campaign about uh, you know shaming certain kinds of individuals now, say for example, if you come from the communist leanings, then or
Yeah.
you come from, yeah, so the idea is not always that the object is within you or it's located on you. It could be something that you identify with. So shaming really happens with, on, and about the object, and the object could be both physical and metaphorical, but it is something that the person in question, the one who's trying to be one who's actually being ashamed, who's made to be feel ashamed of, feels that there is a certain value, there's an identity attached to that object. And the third thing, which is related to this object, and and uh, and the shame thing, is that you really have to be in the same social milieu. Your consciousness has to be the consciousness of the shamer. If there are two categories where the shamed or the ashamed are situated, then you really can't be made to feel shame if you don't really believe in that theory. I'll give a simple example. Say in societies which are extremely obsessed with cleanliness, right, and sometimes do even make to feel some people absolutely terrible if their surroundings are not clean. If you don't really believe or espouse to that kind of idea, you'll brush aside their criticism as just another thing. Yeah, whatever. It's my room is what it is, and you please deal with it. But what if you actually believe in that understanding? What if your imagination of who you are, uh, of your consciousness, of what perhaps someone like Agnes Heller would say, your internal authority, something that you listen to, matches with the external authority of the consciousness that is actually imposing that shame on you. So shame, even when there is a locality to it, there is a object to it, also needs to have the most basic commonality, which is that of consciousness, that you and I should believe in the same models, you and I should believe in the same things, you and I should consider certain things as valuable and others as not. So shaming only happens when the internal authority of the individual, in women, in this case, maybe women's internal authority in terms of looking at their bodies, say menstruating bodies, and the external authority or the external consciousness of the society or the family at large. So you would not identify with a thought that doesn't fall under your moral universe. And you'd perhaps not feel, maybe you'd be proud of it as opposed to being ashamed of it. So shame therefore has to will only happen with your tacit acceptance, because you believe in the standard that is being set out. So that's the third way. As I already mentioned when I was talking about shame, when I try to explain what shame is, shame again, therefore, one of the other identifiers is that it's going to be a negative judgment. If you could be visible to the world, but if it's a positive judgment, you'll not feel shame. You'd feel something else. You'll be proud, or you'll be, I don't know, happy, or just something else, not shame. Shame would always be a negative judgment. So the little blush that you have when when you're called out for the first prize in the class, that's not shame. That's happy embarrassment. That's you feeling good. So there is that distinction. So shame would always be a negative judgment. In these sense, these are the identifiers of what would shame look like to you when you're experiencing it.
Yeah. If we expand it to ask, how does shame inform the sense of self? Like we have, on one hand, spoken that shame is used to discipline, shame is used to put down certain behaviors. Can we extend it further to see that how it correlates to formation of our sense of self? Um,
Yeah. Uh, what is self? I think that's a very difficult question to, and I don't think within the scope of this time, or for that matter, my expertise, but the idea of self, if for this discussion we had to explore that, would perhaps be uh, just the awareness of who you are, right? To extract yourself out of you, and maybe stand at a distance and observe yourself, look at yourself, or maybe just what Hannah Arendt says, the capability to think, the dialogue between me and myself. So if that is what this process is of who you are, of what your self is, then shame becomes a very important uh, it's shame becomes co-evil to culture here. It becomes co-terminus to culture here. Allow me, give me 2 minutes with this. Uh, so societies, when they start living together, when people start actually, living as social, uh, and during the course of time, they come to sort of value certain things over others. It's just shared meanings. Nobody no longer has to read a manual and say, listen, there's a traffic light here and now it's a red stand. We've sort of all agreed into this plan of things. So how societies are ordered, uh, one of the primary needs of ordering that society is to avoid chaos. And the chaos is avoided by bringing in a certain hierarchy, so that everybody knows where to sit. Because when there is inarticulateness, social inarticulateness, or when people don't really know where they belong, where they stand, uh, power cannot function. Because equality would require a lot of us to be more sensitive, a lot of us to give heed to plural ways of thinking. But that would not be orderly, that would be chaotic. So, what happens when you assign values? When you assign values, more value and less value to things, you need a disciplining agent that convinces the rest of the society, including yourself. It's not that there is one part of the society handing it over to other. In fact, everybody is party to this shaming process, where you have to convince yourself that because this is more valuable, it's more desirable. And because X is not so valuable, it's not so desirable. So the idea of the self then uh, gets integrated in the process, such that shame is integrated and upraised in our consciousness from day one. I'll give you a very simple example. I'm sure it would have happened to you also, because it seems to be something that all women kind of immediately say yes to. You're in a public transport, you see a man staring at you, and instead of actually thinking in the first instance something is wrong with them, the first thing that women do is they immediately look at themselves and start adjusting their clothes.
yeah.
The very fact that you're so conditioned to believe that the fact that you're being stared at has something to do with something wrong with you is how we've been able to integrate shame into our everyday consciousness. So, who you are is the person who, once stared at, would actually look back at her clothes to adjust the same and find difficulty and find problems in her own self, instead of actually calling out the problem outside. And this does not happen overnight. This happens through a long journey that both consciousness and shame, undergo. And who you are then through these subtle, ways. One of shaming the deviant, and two of rewarding and honoring the, the conformists, or those who fall right into the ideal of the society. So this is how the self is eroded and constructed at the same time. It's not that women or the queer or the marginalized or the Dalits, the untouchables, quote, they don't have selves that come back, but the selves are constantly eroded by shame performances, by ensuring that the moment the self of the free kind appears, it is shamed, and the moment the other self sort of is there, which conforms to the ideal, is rewarded. And that's how the self uh, gets constructed. And one of the ways that one could constantly have that dialogue is to be self-aware, is to actually inquire into the idea of uh, who am I, and what is my role here, and what is a good life.
Yeah. Yeah. And like if I have to break down what you said about rewarding and shaming, which go hand in hand, again, I'll take the same example of on one hand, you shame people who wear certain clothes or who engage in certain behavior, or who are expressing their sexual being, and on the other hand you reward the staying within the walls or monogamy or things, heteronormativity. If you're rewarding heterosexuality, then automatically you are shaping the sense of self of an individual and their
Sure,
choices. And same if we extend it politically, if you're shaming someone by calling them anti-national, and at the same time, in a way rewarding other group of people, you are trying to control the political self or the citizen self of an individual.
sure,
you know
sure.
you're
Absolutely.
slowly, yeah, you're slowly molding the citizen into uh, who you want them to be.
Yeah, yeah. So the script is right there, but the script, if it's given to you as it is, you have the brain, you have the mind to look at the script and think for yourself, which a lot of us already are doing. But what shame does, it subtly sort of convinces you of your own, slavishness. It convinces you that you're not worthy enough, and therefore you have to be ashamed of who you are. And I think that's where the politics of shame comes in.
Right. I spoke to someone, or I heard it somewhere, that the difference between guilt and shame.
Sure.
Guilt is what you do, your action,
Yeah.
and shame is
Who you are.
you are.
Who you
So
are. Absolutely.
yeah, I might feel guilty for sneaking out of my house one day, but I will feel shame about what a bad girl I am for
Yes,
doing that.
absolutely. You've got this exactly right. Shame, guilt in that sense was gives you a possibility of redeeming yourself. Really, it's about something that you've done, which so guilt is very action oriented. You will not feel guilt. Of course, one would feel one sometimes would feel guilt along with shame as well, but you would mostly feel guilty about something you've done, which always can be undone really by repentance or by going through necessary punishment. But shame becomes about the totality of who you are, so it doesn't really give you that choice in terms of coming back in terms of punishment or repentance or remodeling. So shame becomes about the totality of the human being. Absolutely, yes.
Now, talking about, because we did go upon guilt being redeemable, what is the way out of the shame that is induced,
Mm.
um, because of social rules?
Yeah. um, it's a difficult one really, because I think the emotion of shame and the experience of it is so generalizable that to my memory, in terms of everybody that I've talked about, I don't think I've ever heard anyone say, no, I've never experienced shame. So there is that space, which is both to me both very dangerous, but also very satisfying, because then there is no exclusion from it really. Like uh, the most dominant can also be made to feel ashamed of something, and that's where my work also sort of speaks to that kind of space. See, basically shame has three kind of responses. People actually respond to shame in three different ways, to my formulation. One is that they accept it, they accept the ideal, and they try to avoid shame by towing the line, if you allow me that expression, that you accept what is expected of you and you perform it. And when you perform it, you avoid shame because you no longer become the deviant. You no longer become the thing that has to be ashamed. That's part one of dealing with shame. So you avoid it entirely. How do you avoid it? By just being who you were expected to be. The second thing is you hide. So hiding helps you keep yourselves away from shame, because you may not have ideally accepted the order, but you also have not come in front of the order for the order to be able to shame you. So you hide. There is hiding. The third way, perhaps, of dealing with shame, perhaps to my mind, the more democratic, the more free way of doing it is to own it, to accept it as your own, and to re-signify it. And one could call it subversion of shame. That you actually question the morality upon which the shame is handed out to you, to the person in question, and make it your own. I think one of the most interesting things that I found out in your campaign was exactly that. The name Ori Kalankini is actually subversion of shame. It's the happy celebration of shame and nothing else, to my mind. It's the kalank is a negative judgment of self. It is outside of you. It is given to you. But what you do is you make it your own. You celebrate it. You celebrate it so much so that you identify with it. I think one of the ways of, and that is how, I mean, your campaign speaks so wonderfully with this work, that, subversion of shame sort of inverts the logic of power. And therefore, when you no longer feel ashamed of who you are, and say menstruation as a case in point, well, the hush hush attitude about menstruation, the fact that it seems to be something, there seems to be a very interesting barricading happening here between the pure and the impure, and how women sort of rotate in these two spheres of the pure in during some times of the month, but completely impure on the other side. I think one of the ways then to come out of this would be to accept menstruation as the most natural, the most celebratory, the most important things about themselves, and then invert that logic by not feeling ashamed of things that are thrown at us, but instead of celebrating them and of speaking back to power in the language that does not accept shame as one's own to bear, but as as the shame of the dominant, as the shame of the powerful, that they are actually treating other fellow human beings with, disgust and marginalizing them. So it would come when we would have what you called a split between the internal consciousness and the external consciousness, where one has to stop blaming oneself for it, and therefore subverting shame by accepting uh, it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because even in the 4 points that makes shame is one of them is having the same consciousness as the shamer.
Yeah.
So if internally I don't see menstruation being as anything impure,
Hmm.
and like deep inside, I mean, not just for the words of it, or if inside I don't believe, when I stain, I won't feel like, oh my god, I have to really rush home and change it.
Yeah.
I can just go finish my business, and then when I reach home I can change.
Absolutely.
You know
Absolutely.
yeah. And I remember even when we spoke over the call, we spoke about this. There was one revenge porn put out
Yeah. Yeah.
of a woman. Yeah. And her ex put out revenge porn, trying to shame her, and then she took a week off, and she was a young student. She took a week off, and then when she came back, she put up pictures of herself, in because earlier it was hidden. Like,
Hmm.
she did send nudes, and she did wear certain clothes, in the environment of shame, and it was hidden, and that's why he could shame her. And
Hmm.
then when she started dressing up how she wanted to, and put pictures which were, which could be called as, like, which could be used to shame, but she did it herself. Then people didn't know how to shame her more, because she
Yeah.
didn't buy it at all.
Yeah.
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 At
It's
this
it's
point,
it,
yeah. In fact, I would also want to, yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm saying there's a little caution here also with shame. While one talks about shame as shame subversion is something that is emancipatory and that is liberatory, it's not, I would say, in the ideal condition, because I don't think it's a path that is chosen out for the person really. Because if I'm being shamed, it's not the best that I could have done. It's just that it has been handed out to me and it's been chosen out for me. Ideally, we should not actually have politics or society that uses shame. Shame should not be a part of our socialization. But because it so deeply is, it leaves absolutely no other choice with people who are being shamed but to choose to support it. And that's where the emancipatory logic of it comes in. Ideally, perhaps we should never be shamed for our bodies, for who we are, for what we think, because unfortunately, shame does play a very pivotal role in ensuring the disciplining the patriarchal structures, and then both the victim shaming and the body shaming, and how you've just talked about the mistrust and the criminality involved in making public things that are deeply private. And then that's not something that a person would choose for themselves. But having been being in that situation, there is always a way, because there is a fine distinction between the physical body and the sociological body. What one would think of in terms of the physical aspect of it, that there is a body in place. But very rarely the meaning that are attached to or are given to bodies are very social. So the fact that publicly naked men's bodies are okay, like you could just see them all the time, men taking running publicly with no vests on, with no shirts on, because it's okay. It really doesn't sort of create that kind of a moral panic. But the same courtesy is not extended to publicly naked female bodies. Nakedness in itself is a concept that has attracted all kinds of views. And we've had a long tradition of Dinospefi also, where you have what you call naked saints, Nagababas for that matter, or the Jain naked saints. So the whole idea of a physical body being problematic nakedly or nudely or otherwise, or the fact that shame is associated with just female bodies and not with the male bodies, is all very social and all very cultural. It may or may not necessarily come from the idea of the physical body really. Physically, you bodies could just be mean the same thing, but it's only when we give them social meanings that kind of imagination comes up. Yeah, I'm sorry, but you were saying something.
And same with, even when we talk about the Jain monks, it is not extended to the nuns.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
that's why Akkamahadevi is Akkamahadevi, because she was one who chose that for herself, and
yes,
that caused a lot of commotion.
yes,
Um, yeah.
yes,
I
absolutely.
wanted to add, extending from previous what we said, that recently I came across work by Brené Brown, called Daring Greatly, and she has listed down few strategies. Mm, it's not subverting shame, but there are 3 points. One is identifying my shame triggers,
Yeah.
identifying what roles, what identities, when put upon me,
Hmm.
I feel shame.
Hmm.
What don't I want to be called? So
Hmm.
identifying them.
Hmm.
Second is trying to, so that the first step is identifying your shame triggers, and second is physiologically
Hmm.
identifying your, where does shame reside in my body? How does shame feel? You know, and actually 4 steps.
Hmm. Yeah.
Third is speaking out shame. So there she says, and we had a practice group over 10 weeks. We practiced about bringing out incidences of incidences where people have used shame, and speaking them out to the entire person. That itself could be, I wouldn't say cure for shame, but decrease the charge significantly. I think that's why Me Too movement is bringing the difference it's bringing, right? Like if 100 people are expressing that, yes, I faced it too, I faced it too, it is removing the charge out of me being wrong, or
Sure.
me as a person wrong. So yeah, these are the three strategies she mentioned to identify what triggers shame in me,
Hmm.
where does shame reside in my body, and whom can I speak about this shame to,
Yeah,
and slowly increasing the circle.
yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I think I agree with all the 3 points, and I think one of the ways, because as I mentioned, one of the most one thing that paralyzes a person when in shame is the hiding, because the sheer grip of shame is so much that hiding becomes the only only way out, and that hiding is very scary. It's a perpetual fear of being found out, of being caught, of being I think why people recede back once they're shamed is because the bullying of a certain kind is because then the right to, or the enabling conditions for a person to participate as equal in a space is denied to them. And I think why would speaking about shame, or say in the Me Too movement, the sheer catharsis of coming out and speaking about the experience, then makes available that space wherein you don't have to hide anymore, that you could come out and you could speak to a community of people that you know would listen to you, even if they won't really. But then the fact that the very sure consciousness of not wanting to hide anymore could be very liberating in itself, that I don't want to hide anymore, I just want to come out and I want to talk about this. So I think that whole process could be very liberating in itself for those who experiencing, and those who trying to deal with shame, uh, even momentarily or for a longer period of time.
Yeah. Thank you, Jigyasa. The questions from my side have ended. Is there anything else you would like to speak about which you think missed? Meanwhile, I'll go check on Facebook if there are questions on the comment section.
Okay,
And
okay, please do.
my
Uh,
video is off. Yeah.
yeah, I think I have kind of covered the things that I wanted to say, and if there are any questions, I'd love to answer.
Right. Let's see. Um, can you still hear me, Jigyasa?
Yes, I can. I can hear you.
Okay. So Ambra says, brilliant. Thank you for bringing up this topic. Still feels like a weakness in general feminist studies instead of looking at it as a fierce, powerful moment. There is Vinoja who says he can't hear, and that'll be very bad if our voice has gone out.
Yeah.
But Rajlakshmi says, I also hide or keep my profile low because I think of it as a strategy. No
Okay.
one will stop me if they don't notice me. Yeah, we do that so often. Would you like to speak into that? Um,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. So, uh, not that. See, it's not a moral judgment on hiding, really, but one has to also kind of uh, understand that hiding in itself is problematic, because there's something that's causing you uh, to hide, something that one doesn't feel comfortable with, and it's not their problem, really. The fact that you can't, it's almost like the fact that you can't speak truth because you think the truth would bring negative consequences. So it's almost in that space. It's not that hiding by itself is bad. I think hiding is a consequence of something which is bad. So whoever you are, not being public enough is a different thing. I understand that there's a certain amount of social media anxiety, or public anxiety that one may have, because there's a certain kind of a public eye. The magnitude of it has increased to an extent now that sometimes I feel anxiety about the kind of people who you are accessible to, which is understood. But if you want to hide, if you want to not want to share certain things about you, or you're just not comfortable being who you are, then I think the primary problem there, the concern there, is coming from something which is not okay, and shame has some role to play in it. So it has to do with the fact that perhaps what you want to say, or who you are, does not find acceptance or does not find respect. And that, I think, is the primary problem of denial of human dignity and the denial of human being to do whatever they want to do, of course within the sociological boundaries, within the moral space. But I think there has to be that distinction between a certain amount of social anxiety with making yourself accessible to all, but deliberately hiding because there is a fear of negative judgment. These two things uh,
Yeah.
have to be have to be differentiated from each other.
Last question is, why do you call shame a power? Because the power of shame is what the title was. So if we
Yeah,
can summarize, yeah.
yeah. I call shame is power for actually three reasons. I think shame, first, is a moral concept. It involves questions of morality. What is right? What is the right way of living? What is a good life? And the moment you bring in these moral concerns for society and the individual together, shame has a strong role to play in it because it is speaking very strongly of what is good life and what is not, what is desirable and what is not. And if it is allowed to make that judgment, if it is allowed to be used as a tool to ensure that judgment, then it has what you call a powerful dimension. Shame is also then used as a tool, and as a tool because it whosoever is shaming is powerful with respect to whosoever is being shamed.
Mm.
So then it becomes a tool. So if shame is being handed out, then we just by knowing who is at the receiving end of it and who's at the giving end of it, we know what is the power equation in the society. uh, I don't want to, casually throw Foucault in a conversation without actually speaking about Foucault, because academicians tend to sometimes do that. I'm still an academician in the making, but we tend to throw big concepts and big people without actually going into the detail of an academic subject. But I will have to here. Foucault is someone who's looking at power in the most simplistic terms, and as something which is more diffused and less centralized, or less less at the top, but more at everywhere. So power would be in between, very local. You know how we imagine power as power situated at a citadel, but power is actually everywhere in the little bit of it. So shame is also everywhere in the little bit of it. Shame is regulating relations and conversations and interactions in the smallest possible ways to the biggest possible ways. So in that sense, it's omnipresent. In that sense, it's forever available for you to sort of take out as tool and shame back. So that's why shame is power. If you have it, if you can give it to someone, if you can subvert it by claiming it as your own, you have power over it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jigyasa, for spending an hour of your time and really breaking down shame for us and helping us look into it very deeply. It was very enriching session, and you did a really good job as at explaining it to us patiently. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sneha. You're doing such good work. This was a great pleasure, and thank you.
Yeah, I hope to have you back to talk about something else.
Hopefully, yes. Hopefully, yes.
Thank you. So, shall
Oh,
we go off live from Facebook?
yeah, we should do that.
Yeah.
Uh,